Hello, I am Joel McLeod.
I'm Ronan Tanner.
And welcome to the 905er. A lot of things happened in February, as I'm sure you're all well aware of. So you would be forgiven if a few stories that were important to the 905 were missed. Back on February 8th, the province's Housing Affordability Task Force released its report on how to make housing more affordable in this province. The report gives a number of recommendations on how it believes the province can accomplish this. We can't go into each recommendation line by line, but we can present the general themes of the report in the Ontario government's own words. They are 1. Make changes to planning policies and zoning to allow for greater density and increase the variety of housing. 2. Reduce and streamline urban design rules to a lower cost of development. 3. Depoliticize the approvals process to address NIMBYism and cut red tape to speed up housing. 4. Prevent abuse of the appeal process and address the backlog at the Ontario Land Tribunal by prioritizing cases that increase housing. And 5. Align efforts between all levels of government to incentivize more housing. Now, not all in the 905 are pleased by the report. The Small Urban GTHA Mayors released a joint statement on February 18th detailing the issues that they had with the report. Primarily, that the report did not give sufficient input from municipalities, that it accuses the municipalities of Ontario of politicizing and creating too much red tape for developments to go through, and by removing a lot of authority from municipalities and giving it either to the provincial government or to the Ontario Land Tribunal instead. Now, to better understand the criticism against the task force's recommendations, we invited on the Mayor of Newmarket, John Taylor, to the podcast. Mayor Taylor was first elected as a councillor in 2006 and held the position for 12 years prior to becoming mayor. In 2014, as chair of the Human Services Planning Board, John spearheaded a campaign called Make Rental Happen, which conducted research and advocacy that led to the construction of the first major purpose-built rental building in York Region in over 25 years. He is the chair of the Housing York Incorporated, a member of the Human Services Planning Board of York Region, and a member of the Association of Municipalities Ontario's Housing Task Force. He also sits on the Newmarket Economic Development Advisory Committee and the board of Newmarket Hydro. Today, Mayor Taylor joins us as the head of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee of the Small Urban GTHA Mayors. Okay, well, we'd like to thank Mayor Taylor of the great town of Newmarket, up in the northern part of the 905 for coming on the podcast today and giving us a new perspective and definitely a unique perspective from the small urban mayors of the GTHA organization, association. But you had a response that you made public about the province's Housing Affordability Task Force report. That's a lot of a lot of phrases there. If you could maybe summarize for our listeners your response to it, and as what exactly are the concerns of the small urban municipalities in the GTHA for this report?
Okay, so I could go on a bit of a rant and I could go on for quite a while. So I'll try to chunk it up so you don't have a monologue for 15 minutes. But, I think I'll start with this. So, and then maybe we can break into a little bit more about the detail. But on this, to start with, I just think it is conceptually flawed in two significant ways. The first one is that it is there's a little disclaimer that this is only about private market supply. But it's still a housing affordability, task force report. And it's giving everybody the impression we're tackling housing affordability. And supply is an important part of the challenge we face here. And so I know there's some people who don't believe that necessarily supply is the issue at all, or that and some will argue with some data that we're not undersupplied. I actually don't. I agree that there's a supply challenge. But it's conceptually flawed to give the impression that housing affordability can be addressed in a meaningful way through supply alone. And I think this report seems to suggest that and seems to give that impression. And really, as we know, there are 4 or 5 key ingredients that impact housing affordability, certainly in the last number of years in a challenging way. Some of those more somewhat in control of governments, somewhat not, some are international. But certainly we know some are the high levels of immigration, new Canadians, which is a fantastic thing and important to our economy and a welcome in terms of diversity. Some are interest rate levels. Some is housing being used as a commodity, and some of it is so there's many things that go into this puzzle. So that to me is, first of all, is conceptually flawed. The second conceptually flawed element of this document is that it really does provide one with the overwhelming view also that if you believe supply was the be all and the end all to solving housing affordability, that could be solved simply by fixing these darn municipalities that are full of red tape and planning Luddites who aren't willing to embrace the future. And again, I would say that is very flawed because it's not reflected in reality, and there isn't data to support it. And frankly, we can get into this more later, but if you want to talk about red tape and housing, well, I would say that the lack of a decision for 7 years on Upper York in terms of the York region, which is a sewage solutions facility, and holding up growth in 3 large municipalities to the tune of 40, 50, 60,000 homes is the biggest piece of red tape ever. It's been sitting waiting for a minister's signature for 7 years. And then probably the bigger one is actually the OLT itself. I mean, if you really looked at it and timed out everything, what is slowing down approvals, if you even subscribe to fixing the approval process would solve housing affordability, you would quickly find that the OLT is probably the biggest time consumer of all. And nobody really wants to fix it at the provincial level or address it. But instead they're saying it's all you guys, you municipalities, if you guys were just more efficient and streamlined and less red tape. So I could go many directions from there, but those are 2 big issues I think that's to start with.
This is kind of a habit with this provincial government, I guess, is that they really didn't consult anybody except the development side, the private industry side of things. So they didn't, it's a report that takes aim at the municipalities. It didn't talk to it didn't even bother talking to the municipalities to say, well, what's your side of the argument here? Is that kind of your understanding too?
Yeah, it is for sure. Well, it's undeniable or debatable. You can debate the reasons or the motives, but you can't debate the fact that there was no meaningful consultation with municipalities. There's no municipal representation on the panel. In fact, there was really no representation aside from Habitat for Humanity that was anything outside of the sort of the development perspective, the developers/development perspective. And so, yeah, I think that's obviously massively highly problematic. But it also, I think, questions motives. There's been a number of things that, both in that report and previously, that seem to be taking on perceived challenges that coincidentally, at the same time, are of great benefit to those in the development industry.
Now, I suppose that the comeback that some could level at you, level at municipal leaders, is that, well, you guys are just trying to keep your control over things and you don't want to hand it over and, dead weight of bureaucracy or whatever, the sort of traditional arguments go. Is that really the case? Or, I mean, the problems with the OLT and all its predecessor organizations have been a kind of an ongoing complaint of municipalities, and particularly for anybody seeking re-election very often. What would you do in their place to sort of turn around the ability to provide affordability?
Well, let me start by saying that when you say, is this just us wanting to keep control of the planning process? The answer to that is yes. I mean, I'm frankly tired of facing a town of 90,000 people with planning decision after planning decision after planning decision that at the end of the day really isn't in my control. There's either developers that know they can leverage the OLT against me, or the OLT, in fact, is engaged in many of them and makes the decision in the end. And yeah, so I feel like saying to the province, look, if you don't want us to have control, then take it fully. And I don't want that really, but this game of pretending it's us when it's not us. But let's get into that in a more meaningful way. So what I tried to articulate in the response in the Small Urban Mayors, we had a big conversation. They sort of fed information into myself and Marianne Meed Ward, the mayor of Burlington, and we wrote this document up and have tried to be concise. to try to take on a few things. So let me just start by this, because this is the part that I find very challenging and bothersome, is that there is a lot of people, rightfully so, particularly in Toronto and Toronto media, who like a lot of what they see in this report. And that's because the outcomes the report are seeking are good outcomes. I mean, more missing middle, more rental housing, transit-oriented development. This is good stuff. And so I want to start by challenging the narrative that's being produced that somehow municipal elected officials are trying to put up a barrier to any of that. In fact, we're leaders in that. Come visit me in Newmarket, and I'll show you what we're doing. We're the fourth most densely populated municipality in Ontario. That comes as a surprise to a lot of people.
Yeah,
we have transit-oriented development all up and down our corridors. We have new, 12, 15, 20-story buildings going up all the time. We've got missing middle going on. I'm a champion of affordable housing. We've got every type of housing mix and affordability going on. With the first purpose-built rental building in York Region in 20 years. I could go on and on. So the narrative that somehow we're in the way of achieving these outcomes is a false narrative. So what we're trying to say, particularly when it comes to the OLT part, which does relate to this topic, because as you know, the task force is putting out ideas like 4-story multi-unit buildings as of right on any piece of property, any residential property anywhere. Well, I'll tell you, and it also, by the way, introduces measures to reduce the ability of the public to engage, to lessen public engagement, to put in a $10,000 fee to go to the OLT, which is nothing to the developers, but it takes out every resident group I know of that ever participated. Yep. So where I'm going with that is, if you think you can advance housing options and housing supply in ways that the general public do not support, you will learn eventually you're wrong, and you will set housing affordability backwards by forcing solutions on the public that they do not want.
Mayor Taylor, say that the province goes through with the report as it is, doesn't change it at all. What do you see as the outcome down the road? Say, give it a 5-year timeline under the proposed new report. What would you see happening to urban areas like Newmarket, like Burlington, Vaughan, Markham, these places in the 905 that are under such pressure to expand and find housing? What do you see happening to them over the long term?
I see a lot of people taking advantage of some of the more egregious measures. And again, I want to point out, I support almost every outcome they're trying to seek. It's the tools that they're using to get there, the methods they're proposing to get there that are incorrect. And so what I would see is a lot of people jumping on the quickest opportunities. You'll see speculators scanning every municipality for where's the lot size I can get this multi-unit building in, and they're going to start plopping them down randomly all over the place. And by the way, that's not planning. And I know there's lots of people, California's doing it as of right everywhere, because we need to increase supply and we need more rental and we need, and so I think the outcome actually will be this. The government will be unelected 4 years later. The public will be so frustrated with that approach that government will be out. And here's the worst part. I don't care who's in, liberal, conservatives, in, out, whatever, but it'll set intensification and housing affordability back. People will become more NIMBY. If they think NIMBYs are ruling the world, they'll become more NIMBY because they will be so upset. And I personally have worked hard to get the community to accept and understand the value of growth, of intensification, of missing middle, of affordable housing. And I don't need this kind of, open the gates and that approach is going to set us back. Trust the municipalities. And this goes to the OLT debate. And give me 1 second on this, but if they want to, what they need to do, they approve our official plans, but they typically rubber stamp them. So if you've got some planning policy goals, these outcomes you want to achieve, figure out how to make those in provincial policy stronger, and then really vet our official plans at the time we submit them and say, you haven't met our new missing middle policy. You're not doing transit-oriented development strongly enough, and reject our official plan until it achieves your policy outcomes, province, and then get out of the way. Then say you can only take somebody to a municipality to OLT if they're not living up to their own official plan, which we approved because it meets all of the planning objectives of the province and and beyond. So And then that the advantage of that is you leave local officials like myself who know the community, who know the neighborhoods, who know the actual people, to go, here's how we can achieve it, and we can bring the community with us, and they won't reject it outright and say, we don't like all this stuff. You're forcing us down our throats. Now we don't like intensification, and we don't like affordable housing.
I mean, that makes all kinds of sense to me, because we already have these procedures in place. Every official plan has to go through multiple, it has to go to the region, it has to go to the province to be approved. It's like, well, if you've approved it, why would you then unapprove a detail of it later? And it's such a kind of crazy system to my mind. Now you mentioned the NIMBY word, which certainly is hovers over this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just a matter of interest. I mean, I know mainly about Burlington. That's where I got most experience of kind of development issues. And in my experience in Burlington, the people who've been called NIMBYs have never stopped a development. They've never delayed a development. They've never had any effect on a development. They've made a lot of noise, and perhaps rightly so, and they've had an effect on elections. But to my knowledge, they have never had any effect on an actual development. Is that your experience in Newmarket and York?
Well, I would say actually, and I'm actually proud of this. I think it, and I don't love the word NIMBY, but
no, I hate it. Don't get me wrong.
If that's the easiest way to categorize, then there's very little. At least in the town of Newmarket, people are very comfortable with density on our corridors. They're comfortable with affordable housing, social housing. So we didn't, we put up that first 15-story rental tower in a while. I mean, we have other towers, but and there was virtually no public concern at all. And so I would actually say have we had cases that have gone to the OLT and residents have really objected and it slowed it down? Yes. Yeah. So I think there are cases where resident engagement slows it down. But again, I want to say this, people will say, oh, it's become all political. Oh, that's politics. When did politics become a swear word? Doesn't that mean that the elected officials who are elected on purpose to be accountable to the people are listening to them and trying to find compromises or ways forward? I mean, isn't that democracy? For democracy?
Yeah.
So I think this drive, and even through this task force, to sort of to take the public out of the equation. First of all, it won't work. The public will eventually win, and secondly, it's really anti-democratic.
Do you think there's actually any chance? I mean, you said, if the government were to pass the as of right 4 stories anywhere, that they would be unelected within 4 years. Do you think there's any chance that that would be my guess? And you're more informed than I am, but yes, I don't think they would ever touch that with a 100-foot barge pole, because for a party that depends perhaps more than any other on kind of suburban votes, it's suicide. The minute those buildings start going up, there's going to be a revolution on their hands. Yeah, I mean, what do you think the government would actually have the guts to pass? And I'm assuming this wouldn't be until after an election anyway.
I don't think. I think they probably would be. My guess, the way politics works, is they'll talk about implementing some important measures around increasing supply and affordability after the election. And I think they will be smart enough to not take some of the more aggressive measures. There's recommendations in there that are fine. There's several, but I actually advocated at the region and at AMO. I'm on the AMO Housing and Homelessness Task Force and at York Region. And in both cases, staff had a list of what recommendations we supported and what ones we didn't. And in both cases, I successfully advocated at AMO and at York Region. Don't send a list like that. We're engaging in a document that did not involve us and consult us. And our position should be, we agree with the outcomes you're seeking. Many of the methods, many of the approaches are problematic. You need to stop, slow down, reverse, and bring us in a meaningful way. Full stop.
This might be a bit of a hypothetical, but one thing that I've noticed from all the discussions about development is that it's always the developers go to a plot of land and say, we want to build X here. And it's always the developers who initiate the process. I'm wondering would it make more sense, you as the municipality, say, no, we're going to go to the developer and say, this plot of land, we want it to be developed for mixed use residential, use, or we want to be able to fit 50,000 people into this plot of land, and kind of do like a mixed tender. Send out, say, to the development industry who can do it for the cheapest feeds, and who can keep it within the prescribed density. Maybe that may be a better solution to this problem than developers always kind of picking, because it seems like they're sorry, go ahead.
I see what you're saying, Joel, but the problem with that is that most of the developable land is already owned by individual developers or collective developers. And you can't put one against the other. And in terms of saying what should go there and putting the cart before the horse, we do that. It's called an official plan and a secondary plan. And they're very clear. In fact, our secondary plan on Davis and Yonge allows between 4 and 20 stories. And we've not only put the secondary plan in place, but we were one of the few municipalities that now have put the zone. We've done a zoning conformity exercise. So it's now zoned exactly. They can come in and go straight to site plan unless they want to do more than what is allowed. And it's already very permissive. It's zoned and it's secondary plan done, official plan done. Go to site plan and start building. We're actually, Newmarket's very ready to embrace transit-oriented development and density on our corridors, and we've got rapid transit. But so that exists. The problem is that often, and let me just, if I can, sort of quickly say one thing. Developers aren't the enemy. I work with many of them closely. We're in meetings all the time. Many of them are partners in developing communities, and if you work with them the right way, they are often work with you as well. The problem is that and they'll admit this themselves, that their goal is to achieve the highest financial return they can, and the OLT gives them the opportunity to pursue a return beyond what's achievable within our official plans and our secondary plans.
It's funny you mention that, because I was actually going to be my follow-up question was basically why do we hear this tale all throughout the 905, this kind of battle between municipality and developer, because what you're describing is not a unique situation across any municipality. And so you mentioned the OLT, so I guess it comes down to that: is the OLT that really the problem here? Is that it's not, it's kind of at the whims of whomever is in power in Queen's Park. If the provincial, wherever government's in power, however they feel about OLT is how the winds sway towards favoring municipalities or favoring developers. And do we need just better reform, or is it just, this is should we just do away with the OLT because it is in fact a political vehicle for whoever the whims are of the government of the day?
Well, I guess I don't think my experience has been it doesn't alter that much from government to government. It does alter when you alter its mandate. And that can be done by a different government. But it's not just, there's a new government there, we'll lean this way now. Those judges have been there for a while, those adjudicators. I mean, you need to provide a different mandate. And again, my point would be, and am I sure I have the perfectly right answer? No, but you can't have no appeal mechanism. I mean, again, if a town says you can build a 6-story apartment building in that corner and 100 people come out and scream at them and they go, oh, no, you can't now. That's wrong. And then you should be able to appeal that somewhere and say, no, your official plan said I could do that. So, but you shouldn't be able to appeal to achieve things that aren't because if the official plan has been approved by the province and by the town, it should be full stop, it's over. And that would save a lot of red tape. But I do want to say this again, when you say, is that the problem? Is this the problem? The original conversations about housing affordability, again, it's a false premise. The OLT is not going to fix, whether we change it, alter it, abolish, it's not going to fix housing affordability either, which is a much bigger and more important conversation. But that's.
And in fact, we've hardly addressed the affordability issue today, sort of directly head on. We're just talking about the process, which is how this seems to get bogged down. Coming back to what you said about making the official plans, kind of everything comes back to, is it the official plan or not? That, as I understand it, was kind of what the LPAT, the original plan for the LPAT was to be. Is that your understanding too? I mean, do you think the LPAT, if it had survived in its original incarnation, right, would have been a step forward? I mean, I'm not saying it would have been perfect, because what I understand of it, it wouldn't have been, but would it have been better?
Yes, it would have been a step forward. I think it had some language, and again, it directed the adjudicators in a way to give more. To defer more to local official plans. It didn't go as far as I'm suggesting, which is it should really only be there for people for municipal councils who are not respecting their own official plan. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a balance in between there somewhere. But yes, it would have been a step forward. We need something that is a little more respectful and reflective of local official plans. I'm happy to with any provincial government and others, AMO, to look at that more closely. But it's definitely not working the way it should, in my opinion.
Let's bring the conversation back full circle. So, in relation back to this Housing Affordability Task Force report, it sounds you're not happy with it. From the small urban GTHA mayors, there's a lot that are not happy with it. What would you like to see happen going forward?
So, and I point out now that both AMO and the region of York, and I'm sure there's others, but are also pretty much on the record in a similar way of dissatisfaction with the tools it's suggesting and the approach it took to arriving at those decisions. What I'd like to see is, and I think it could still happen, and I'm optimistic, but I'd like to see the government say that they want to continue to address the issue of housing supply, and that they're going to now sit down directly with municipalities. They said we can comment on it. There's a commenting period. Well, there's a commenting period online for every provincial project. That's not respectfully engaging with municipal leaders. And so I'd like them to slow down, step back, and say we still want to address supply. We still believe that the goals of this report are good ones. There are recommendations that are good ones, but we're going to now set up a formal engagement process with municipal leaders to better understand the municipal perspective and come to an approach to supply that brings a balance and brings that municipal perspective. And then I'd say number two, what I really want to hear before an election in particular is, and that we plan to bring forward more policy around housing affordability and approaches to housing affordability beyond just supply, because that's not going to do it. They might, look, let's face it. You bring in another, 50,000 homes over the next whatever year or two, over and above what they're expecting to do. All those homes are going to be, even townhomes are going to be over $1 million. And very little of it will be rental. So we're not really getting to the crux of the matter.
I just want to, I know our time is coming to an end, but a couple of things that, one of the things, this kind of headline thing that was leaked ahead of the actual release of this report was the kind of, the part of it that appeals to people, the kind of urbanists, which I include myself in, who are in favor of kind of missing middle, gentle density, as it's called. How do you agree that that's a good objective, that we do open up the single family home neighborhoods somewhat, perhaps not to this extreme, but and how would you go about doing that at a municipal level to sort of say, okay, just blocking off huge swathes of all our cities and towns just because they have single family home neighborhoods is weird, frankly, when you can't do that anywhere else. But at the same time, there's a limit to what makes sense.
Yeah, I think the province should through provincial policy require municipal official plans to have missing middle policies, including missing middle zoning, and then we would go through the democratic process of putting that policy in place, engaging the public. Every landowner that's affected by it would be able to come to us and say, I like this, I don't like it, this is the problem here, that. And we would implement something. And I suspect what you'd find most municipalities would do is, what I think Newmarket will do regardless of a provincial policy existing or not, is right now we have our secondary plan, which takes our major corridors and allows for transit-oriented development, significant density, high rise or mid rise, depending on your perspective of where you're from. And then we would look to some of our other corridors, our arterial roads, and look at some of those and which ones are appropriate to be rezoned for missing middle. And they're basically on the edge of every stable residential neighborhood. And so you introduce it on those, and they have not higher, but they have better transit on them typically. And then you introduce it in those locations, which I believe we will do in our next secondary plan regardless. And you largely keep the stable residential neighborhood as it is. And maybe one day that will need to be looked at as well. But, again, thinking that the need to look at missing middle and stable residential neighborhoods the same way in Newmarket or Burlington or Ajax that you do in downtown Toronto. That's the other thing. Everybody talks about these policies like they all exist in downtown Toronto, and there's a difference. And so we can achieve, probably meet all the goals on a unit count or however they want to do it from a missing middle perspective, just like we do for intensification or density on corridors, without incurring into established neighborhoods at this point. And maybe someday in the future, 30 years, 50 years from now, we'll have to look at that too, maybe, right? Who knows where this leads, but, and I'm all for doing what we need to do to increase housing supply, to have housing options of all types, stacked towns, apartment buildings, rental, et cetera. So, but I think leave it to us to figure out how to do it. We'll do it.
I see we're coming up on our time limit. I have one final question I'm curious about. We're coming up on a provincial election on June 2nd. I'm curious to know, are you or any of your fellow mayors in the 905 or even Ontario at large planning to, maybe, I'm not saying take a side or campaign for political party or not, but just insert yourselves into the political discussion on this issue? Because this seems to be an issue that keeps popping up, not just in 905, but also across the entire province, about housing affordability and development, and how we develop our urban areas. Are the mayors going to be taking a bit more of maybe a proactive approach to make sure that their issues are involved in whatever debate happens come this provincial election?
I think you'll see a variety of approaches from a variety of mayors. I take a great deal of pride in being nonpartisan and not picking sides, for sure. I will work with any government. I am continuing to work with every government to advance the interests of Newmarket. I will say this: I'm just as interested in the Liberals' policy or thoughts on this issue. They haven't. I don't have any clarity there either. So I'm not giving them or anybody a free pass on this issue. We'll ask about this issue, and I suspect others will ask about the issue. But I'm not the type to walk into a all candidates debate and say, I need to know where you stand on this. But I will speak directly to my representatives or candidates and tell them that your party needs to come to the table on this. We're all watching. So it's a fine line. I'll be honest with you. But we definitely have the conversations and put it out there. And certainly right now, as you've seen, we're putting the position out as the Small Urban GTHA Mayors. The AMO is, the York region is, and others are. And so I think I'm hoping to see some clarity and some conversation from all parties on this topic and other topics. Housing. I really need to see more about affordable housing too, not just housing supply.
I shouldn't really ask another question because we've got like seconds left, but I can't resist just because you said that one thing. Do you think, and it's almost, you can't give a yes or no answer, but almost, do you think ultimately the way to solve affordable housing is that we need much more involvement by municipalities as basically landlords, like you would see in Europe, where huge stocks of housing are owned, maintained, and let by the cities?
The short answer is yes. I'm the chair of Housing York, which is the equivalent of that. That's what that is on behalf of all 9 municipalities. And I when I came in, I said I want to double the rate of growth of our units. I moved a motion at the region that every lower tier municipality donates 2 acres of land every 5 years, or a building site every 5 years, to try to accelerate that. It is not the only answer. It needs everything. We need. I could go on for a very long time about this, but we need housing supply. We need more government-owned or community or social housing. We need more missing middle. We need way more rental housing. We're going to hit a wall with people. The demand for rental housing, whether people want it or not, that's going to be the only option for many people, and we're not building enough. So it could go on and on. But
I think, well, perhaps we can have you on again to talk about that one specifically, because it would be a fantastic conversation for sure. Yeah, it's such a big topic that certainly half an hour is not long enough. Thank you so much, Mayor Taylor, for joining us today. Really appreciate it, and for giving us your insight into what's certainly going to be an important issue, either at this election or a future one.
Thanks very much. It is an important topic, that's for sure. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.